Recently, MBC, a Korean news network, has put out a documentary about the Unification Movement and its co-founder, Hak Jahan Moon, as well as her late husband, Sung Myung Moon. Hak Jahan Moon is currently detained on charges of misusing church funds and embezzlement in order to bribe political officials, which is against Korean law. However, her detainment has been marked with human rights violations such as not receiving proper medical care after a heart surgery and not even being able to have access to a bed in order to rest after this surgery, and not having access to a wheelchair or even a cane, which she needs in order to walk effectively. Why is this all happening? NBC tries to investigate. Do they do a good job? Is their documentary grounded in the values of being a truth seeker, grounded in faith, grounded in values, grounded in logic? Or is it grounded in emotion and weak arguments? I think you'll find that it's the latter. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. My name is Luke Jean, and thank you so much for watching this video. If you are new, or you're someone who has watched my videos in the past, but maybe didn't finish them, or maybe you lost track of time because you were so enjoying them, please subscribe to the channel and support the channel as I not only raise awareness about this issue going on, but also explore the realms of theology and philosophy from the perspective of a truth seeker. And even though I study and believe in the principles of unificationism, I want to approach this documentary with an objective, truth-seeking perspective to the best of my ability, even though I might have some biases as someone who believes in unificationism. So with that being said, and with the caveat that the clips I'm about to show you are using auto-generated captions translated from Korean to English, and that the translation is going to be extremely poor, and I'll have to rely on my knowledge of unificationist theology in order to guess what some words actually mean. For example, there's some things where they say scholar or Chinese, and that's just not it at all. Nevertheless, we're going to work with the poor translation together and react and see what this documentary is alleging about the unification movement.
승리의 날을
한학자 총재님께 감사드립니다.
홀리모더한을 모르는 이 나라 정치인 좀 깨우쳐줘라. 어머님을 지켜나갑시다.
So right away, we know the tilt where this documentary is going towards. Look at the image. The image of Mother Han as a dark, cloaked, hidden figure with ugly and old and despicable hands on top of the surface of one of the Unification Church buildings. That is the imagery and that is the narrative this documentary seeks to portray. They're saying so right from the beginning. And so, from the beginning, already, they're not seeking truth objectively. They're appealing to emotion. And I understand, right? It's important to bring the audience in with drama and intrigue, but this case has enough drama and intrigue without that kind of imagery. And it's actually pretty interesting because it's a polar opposite to unification movement imagery, where Mother Han and Father Moon are both always portrayed in the light, in the shining lights, in fact. Light all around them, their faces bright and smiling. This is the total opposite. This is a dark, cloaked figure that is implied to be some sort of evil force hovering over the unification movement. Is this image really valid? We're gonna see. But right away, they're starting off on a bad foot. Because if this is a news organization, if this is an organization that is seeking the truth, you don't start out with that kind of imagery.
1943년에 독생녀가 탄생이 됐어. 6.25 동란이 일어났어. 어떻게 잘 알려지지 않은 작은 나라 동란에 유엔의 16개국 이상이 와서 젊은 피를 흘렸을까? 왜 그런 일이 벌어졌어? 이거 알아야 돼, 이 민족이. 누구 때문에? 독생녀 때문에. 알겠나? 네. 응?
Alright, so the documentary begins by laying out unificationist theology. And it does a decent job, because what the documentary is highlighting is Mother Han's calling as the only begotten daughter of God. A position, yes, indeed, on par with Jesus Christ. But the documentary doesn't go into exactly why they feel this calling. And you can read about it. There's an autobiography from Father Moon and a memoir from Mother Moon. There's volumes and volumes of speeches from Father Moon. And there's many speeches available, particularly online, from Mother Han. And it is not as simple as elevating themselves to Jesus' position. Not only do they feel called to complete Jesus' mission, which they feel is to create and usher in the kingdom of heaven on earth, the kingdom of heaven on earth, can you imagine that? But Unificationist believers in Unificationist theology are called to complete that mission as well. If you go as early as 1956, Father Moon in his sermons always talked about asking the believers in his congregation to complete Jesus' mission, to become the body of Jesus and to become the body of the Holy Spirit. And Mother Han is doing the same thing with her teaching of being a heavenly tribal Messiah, which Father Moon also talked about, starting in the late 60s, that term, tribal Messiah. All Unificationists in Unificationist theology and teachings are called to be messiahs themselves, to become, to use Unificationist theology term, true parents. Although that's not even a theological term, because true parents is more than that. True parents is the key. It is Father Moon and Mother Han as these true parents finishing Jesus' mission to relate with every single person on the earth from such a parental position, from a parental. Oftentimes in the documentary it talks about, when it's showing clips of Unificationist events, the heart of mother, the heart of father. Well, what it means is, how can everyone attain the heart that originally comes from Jesus, that Father Moon and Mother Han feel that they have within themselves, and thus wish to complete Jesus' mission? How can Unificationists do the same thing? That's what they leave out. And I understand, it's, if you're not in the unification movement, if you haven't studied Unificationism, you're most likely not going to know that. And it does a nice job in explaining the key in theology nowadays, and teachings nowadays. I say theology because this is a more intellectual channel and I'm trying to be more academically universal with my terms, but the only begotten daughter is a key part of Unificationist teachings. And they lay that out, although incompletely. And that might cause problems in investigating the truth later on.
한 총재는 휠체어를 타고 나왔습니다.
5가지 혐의 내용에 대해서 다 인정하셨나요?
권성동 의원에게 1억 원 왜 전달하셨나요?
내가 왜 그럴 필요가 있습니까?
김건희 여사한테도 목걸이 가방 전달한 적 없으신가요?
내가 왜 그래야 하는데?
직접 지시하셨죠?
아니야.
내리시. 선생님, 권성동 김건희 씨에게 성격하신 것이 정말 없으십니까? 선생님, 한 말씀 해주십시오. 선생님.
That I mean with regard to human treatment. Where's the police escort? Why are people barraging a woman in a wheelchair? Why are they not letting her enter the car? Just some questions.
이 안에 든 회계 문서를 통해 일부나마 엿볼 수 있습니다. PD수첩은 오늘 전문가들의 검증을 거친 문서 중 일부를 공개하고자 합니다. 그에 앞서 보여드릴 것이 있습니다. 세계 평화통일가정연합, 흔히 통일교라 불리는 이 단체의 교리는 구원은 가정을 통해 완성된다는 믿음이 핵심입니다. 그래서 또한 출산을 통해서 꾸리는 참 가정을 가장 큰 신앙의 목표로 삼고 합동결혼식을 가장 중요한 의식으로 여깁니다. 그런데 취재가 시작되자 자신을 통일교 2세라고 밝힌 한 여중생이 PD수첩에 한 통의 편지를 보내왔습니다.
Forgive the poor translation. And now the bombshell of the documentary. This is the stuff. Family is the most important value in the unification movement and its theology. And that's true. Salvation does come through the family in unificationist teachings. And they're going to use that to usher in a bombshell, hidden documents on a USB drive, a letter from a middle school girl that her family life is in shambles. And the reason why, and this is what the documentary makes the case for, the reason why is because of the unification practice of mass weddings and matching different cultures and peoples together.
안녕하세요. 통일교 2세 중2 여학생입니다. 저희 부모님은 통일교 사람이고 합동 결혼식으로 결혼하셨어요. 엄마는 일본인, 아빠는 한국인이에요. 저희 가정엔 애정이 없어요. 밥도 다 따로 먹고 나는 평생 사랑받지 못하겠지라는 생각도 들고 온갖 부정적인 생각밖에 들지 않아요.
1960년대부터 시작된 통일교 합동 결혼식.
옛날에 뭐 깨지고 근데 이것도 엄마가 책임져야 할 문제고 엄마 아빠가 책임져야 할 문제라고요. 교회에서.
They take a family problem, and it's a tragic situation that is highlighted in the documentary. Over the course of the documentary, we learn that this girl's family and one or two other people's families that are the child is, or the young person is interviewed in the documentary. We get a story of how these people were raised in homes where the parents cared more about giving money to the church for its various practices than clothing their own children. We get a story of how there's fighting in the home and the blame is put on the child. A tragic situation, an emotionally damaging one at that for someone living in that kind of household. But that's the problem. The documentary says and makes the case that this is a Unification Church issue. It is only in the Unification movement that such things happen, and it is because you have Japanese and Korean parents living together because they were matched, perhaps forced to enter into a marriage and have a kid. But those type of problems happen everywhere, especially in developed countries. Look at the countless studies about teenage suicide ideation, teenage depression, teenagers feeling lack of love, whether in the home or at school. It's universal. It's a human problem, and it's a tragic one at that, but it is a human problem, a human condition, not a unification movement problem, not a condition solely lying in the houses and homes of Unification Church members. That is a gross generalization of the highest I've ever seen in a news documentary, and that's saying something. To put family problems as solely a Unification Church problem, and it's all caused by Unification Church and its practices, is poor journalism. It's absurd. And notice at the end of the clip I just showed you, I feel for the kids. Well, you know what? Every kid that's going through that should be felt for and should be prayed for. And when I was watching this documentary, I really felt for the people that were being interviewed. Such terrible circumstances. But what does the documentary do? Where does it drop off in terms of its integrity? It appeals to emotion in order to make the argument that it is simply a Unification Church issue and a Unification Church problem that has resulted in these type of families occurring in Korean society. What a weak argument. Absolutely weak.
초반에 몇 번의 희원은 70만 원이 들고 그 이후로 막 400, 200, 400 그 정도 높은 대까지의 조상은 5만 원씩 이렇게 후원 헌금을 해야지 조상들을 지옥에서 천국으로 보낼 수 있다라는 그런.
Alright, now the documentary shifts into Unification Church practices as it relates to and on the foundation of these people's stories about the difficult family life they endured. One of the stories is from one of the people that interviewed is that their parents didn't clothe them in order to make ancestor liberation money and in order to have spirit liberation money to pay for the church. Now, we need some background on this. We need to unpack this because the documentary does not explain ancestor liberation. It does not explain spirit liberation and blessing. It just mentions it and says this family, this set of parents prioritize that over their child. And no matter what the beliefs are about those kind of practices, that's wrong. Those parents were wrong. Now, is the Unification Church as a whole guilty? Like I said, human condition or Unification Church condition? Are family problems a human condition or a Unification Church condition? The answer is it's a human condition. And talk to anyone, religious, secular. Take a secular person who maybe doesn't believe in religion. Perhaps his or her parents are, rather than clothing their kid, are spending money on drugs because they're an addict. A tragic situation. Those parents are wrong too. Parents waste money on a lot of things that they probably should use for the sake of their children. And Unification Church members who are human and have a human condition are no exception to that. But what is ancestor liberation? Ancestor liberation comes from ancient traditional Asian practices which value heavily ancestors and other regions around the world too, such as Africa. And the Unification Church and its theology has importance placed upon ancestors as well, and the importance of bringing them in a positive way into the lives of believers. So in order to do that, Unification Church believers set what are called conditions. And that black book, that core text that was shown in the clip earlier, the exposition of the divine principle, details what a condition entails. 3 things: central figure, meaning you, the person offering this condition, an object for the condition, and a time period, represented often by biblical numbers. Now, in the Old Testament, it's explained that conditions were often animals. In the Old Testament as well, it transitioned in the time of Moses to offerings at the tabernacle and the temple, and most importantly, faith in God's word. There's always some sort of conditional object, an object for the condition. And nowadays, one of the most valuable things that people everywhere can give up is money, the love of money, the attraction to money, the desire for money. And by offering it up to an institution higher than yourself, or a person or a thing, for example, the Unification Church itself, you are setting a good condition for you to transform yourself and to transform someone or some spirit else. That's the practice of ancestor liberation in the Unification movement. And the documentary goes into the price sheet and how it's a lot of money, and that's a different discussion. Should the cost of ancestor liberation, this religious practice in the Unification movement designed to bring about some sort of spiritual experience and connect people to ancestors, which in the West we don't really connect too much, but in the East and even in Africa, people connect to, is the amount of money being charged providing the most optimal experience for that? That's a different discussion. I would say no, frankly. That's my opinion. No, the money is too high and it should be changed immediately. But does that mean that the Unification movement is some sort of brainwashing cult that is coercing believers to do this? No. Do leaders in the Unification movement, do they coerce? Do some, we don't know all their names, are some coercing members, creating a toxic environment in their churches, saying that if you don't do this, you will go to hell, or your ancestors will be in hell forever, and you're going to be having huge indemnity or debt to pay on earth? I'm sure some people do that, and those leaders are wrong. But as we're going to see, leaders in an institution doing bad things doesn't mean the entire institution should be dissolved.
1999년부터 2011년 사이 약 7조 2천억 원가량의 헌금이 한국 통일교 관련 재단으로 보내졌습니다.
매달 100억에서 300억 정도? 그 정도 돈이 매달.
헌금이요?
네, 일본 협회에서 보내는 헌금이.
신도들에게 계속 헌금. 천원궁 프로젝트 총 사업 예산은 약 9,200억 원, 2023년 기준 집행 누계 약 7,100억 원, 이 중 교주 생애 전시관과 관련해 책정된 예산만 약 1,131억 원으로 추정됩니다.
Alright, what does the documentary go into next? It talks about how the Unification movement is receiving tens of millions and millions of dollars in donations from the members of the Unification movement in Japan, oftentimes in cash, according to the testimony of one individual. Now, I've covered this on my channel back when the Unification movement was dissolved in Japan and how it was a dangerous legal precedent. And in my video 6-7 months ago, I didn't defend the Unification movement's actions. I said quite clearly, and I will right now, that the coercive solicitation of funds was wrong by the leaders. Absolutely, unequivocally wrong. And they deserve consequences. But does that mean an entire institution should dissolve because some leaders at the top are doing wrong things? No. What's a good example? The Catholic Church. You have huge, hundreds of thousands, millions perhaps, cases of sexual exploitation of minors, particularly boys, by priests in the Catholic Church. Should the Catholic Church, do I believe that the Catholic Church as a whole, which has also done a lot of good in the world, be dissolved for such actions of some people in that institution? No, it should not be dissolved. It should be reformed, and the people who committed such actions should be brought to justice. Same thing with the Unification movement. Anyone that's coercively soliciting funds for donations should be held accountable. But that does not mean the entire institution, which objectively speaking has done a lot of good in the world, be dissolved. The answer is no.
통일교 측이 김건희 씨에게 건넸다고 알려진 샤넬 가방과 명품 목걸이. 목걸이를 구입했다는 서울 강남의 한 백화점 매장을 찾아가 봤습니다. 건진 법사를 통해 전달했다는 목걸이의 가격은 6,220만 원.
가장 크게 많이 차이 나긴 하는데 한 7,000원 정도 고객님 가시는 거. 네.
김건희 여사님이 착용했던 그 목걸이가 이거예요? 이거. Alright, so now we get to the charges in Korea, where Park Jae-moon, as well as key church officials, are charged with bribing the former First Lady, as well as a representative of the People's Power Party in South Korea, which is against South Korean law. I will say it again. Do the actions, the wrong actions of leaders deserve to be investigated, including the potential actions of Mother Han herself? Yes, they should. But should it be done with threats of dissolution, cancellation, persecution? No. Should the investigation be done on the back of a detainment in which improper human treatment is being done, where there's no proper medical care, no wheelchair or cane for Mother Han? Is that the way it should be done? Absolutely not. It is unequivocally wrong. The way that the special prosecutor is going about this investigation is wrong. And it's a nuance, because yes, if there were wrong actions committed, they should be investigated. Absolutely. But not in a way which is targeting and painting the Unification Church as a movement which has a set of problems that the rest of humanity and other institutions do not. The Unification movement, like other religious and even political and educational institutions, has problems. Wow, it has problems? No way. Maybe we should treat it just like everyone else and not target it because they're a fringe religion. They're a fringe institution. And they do things differently. They pray loudly. They do cross-cultural matchings, matched by the founders. They do things differently. There's a clip where, and I don't show it here, but there's a clip where they show the prayer vigil and they show kids sleeping on the floor because it's 10 at night and they're tired and that's what kids do. And it's like, oh my goodness, how dare they? The Unification Church, look at them. They're doing things differently. They're praying too loudly. They're doing this. They're doing that. What happened to equality under the law? What happened to justice? What happened to equality under the law? Investigate, yes. Dissolve, no. Investigate properly. Not in the way that is going on here. And the documentary shows this. They make weak arguments. They bring out clips of prayer vigils and show ancestor liberation, and they say, this is different, this is strange. They make that argument, and they attach it to the Unification Church family members have problems in their families. There's problems here, there's problems here. Here's a very tragic case here, here's a very tragic case here, and tragic, it really is, honestly. Working with kids, kids go through this all the time. It really sucks. It's terrible. They're painting it as a Unification Church issue and not a human issue. Mother Han doesn't have personal money. She doesn't receive a salary. Think of a pastor who lives at a church. The pastor doesn't have a house. The house is the church. Same thing with Mother Han. The Chunjeongun Palace that the documentary says, oh my gosh, look at this, look how fancy. It's not just her house. It's where you have daily leaders meetings, you have events, you have tours, and also it's along with the Cheonwon-gun, which the documentary talks about, and how it was 920 billion won to build. Those buildings are for religious and sacred purposes, just like every other religion in history, to preserve the tradition, preserve the teaching, preserve the key figures for thousands and thousands of years. It's not just a temple to be looked at and be beautiful. No, it's to preserve the history and tradition of the Unification movement, something that other religions have done as well. Notice how the Unification movement is more common than different. Notice how it has way more commonalities than differences with other religions, and yet it is still being treated differently.
통일교의 입장을 듣기 위해 통일교 측에 여러 차례 인터뷰를 요청했지만 그들은 응하지 않았습니다.
They just said, oh, well, Unification Church officials and people haven't responded to interview. Well, here I am. Here's my response. MBC, please clip me. Please, this is my response to what you have to say as someone who has studied unificationism and comes from the position of truth-seeking. I 100% like how, and I appreciate how you are laying out unificationist theology in a broad way, which presents some truth. What I don't like is the narrative that human problems are actually just Unification Church problems. I agree with that last part. A lot does need to be reviewed, and they're asking some good questions at the end, but it's on the foundation of making human problems actually just a Unification Church problem, and I don't agree with that at all. This is my reaction to this documentary created by MBC, Korean News Network. If you enjoyed my reaction video and you have thoughts of your own, Please share them in the comments. I want to hear whether you agree, whether you disagree, whether you believe Mother Han should be going to casinos, whether you think that Unification Church problems are unique to themselves, or are they part of a larger human picture? Are these charges based in fact, or are they be investigated with a targeted tilt towards the movement for being different? And do you think that the treatment of Mother Han in detention is correct? Or is it in violation of human rights norms? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.